It's Christmas Eve 2015, and I wanted to share a little story. Well, an experience that I had, and this was the Christmas of 1966, so 49 years ago. Now, my mother was not one, she had some mental illness problems. And for whatever reason, she decided that, again, we were going to play Leave the Stepfather, who was nothing short of kind of evil. He was really bad to us. Of course, with her, the problem was is she'd leave, then she'd go back, and she'd leave, she'd go back. And this went on for years. It, it, it really played head games. Well, anyway, I don't know if it was the 23rd or 24th of December that she decided to do it again. We wound up, I'm, driving. I think we drove, or did we take the bus into Republic, PA? That's where my grandparents are from. And they, normally Christmas was, Easter, was spent with my grandparents in Republic, not Christmas. Christmas was at home, or the other people, family members went with them. So we must have taken the bus because as we were walking from downtown Republic, which, believe me, it's a one-horse town. It's so small, and still kind of is. It's just a village. It's not even really a town. That the the bus it maybe ran once an hour, but I remember it being cold, and I mean cold. But it wasn't snowing. There was snow on the ground, but it wasn't snowing at the time. So me and Jeffrey, so I would have been about 13, and Jeffrey would have been about 11, with my mother, and here we are, leaving, for as bad as our home was, it was still our home, leaving on Christmas, Christmas Eve or the 23rd, and heading off to my grandparents. And apparently my grandparents had made arrangements with my Aunt Karen. And that's Karen is my mother's sister, so is Cookie. And they lived in New York, I think in Queens or the Bronx. Probably both between the two of them. And it was that October, the middle of October, was when my cousin Stephen was born. So he would have been maybe 6 weeks old at the time, and we were just, Jeffrey and I were just shuffled off here and there. We wound up in Republic, and we're walking up the hill. And I mean, these hills are, mini mountains, if you will. It's in the Appalachians. And it's icy, cold. And there was a neighbor there that would put a record player out on his front porch. And he did this every year, I guess. I don't know who it was. But they would play Christmas music. Now, here I was, me and Jeffrey and my mother, traipsing up and down the hills of Republic to get to my grandparents' house. I'm not even sure they knew we were coming. And we were walking, and it was cold, crisp. We heard the music, and because of the softness of the snow and the coldness in the air, the music just echoed. it was beautiful. I mean, it was really, in all the turmoil that was going on and us trudging up the hill. And I'm not making this sound like it's the baby Jesus story, because trust me, it wasn't. But that I just remember the beautiful, of course, it was more the classical. It wasn't the singing kind of music, it was more classical. And just echoing. I mean, if you were in a music hall, if you will, like Severance Hall or wherever, I don't think it could have sounded any prettier than it did that night. And the only other thing that I remember besides this Christmas, amazing Christmas music, getting there, and of course, anything with my mother, it was just full of drama. And again, I'm not remembering all of the timeline, but I remember my Uncle Frank Castora came to Republic. Now, that was like a 12-hour drive. He had worked that day, drove 12 hours to Republic, picked us up. Well, now he's thinking he's only picking up my grandparents. And here it is, me and Jeffrey and myself in tow, and schlepping us in the car and heading out to New York. And I don't know if my mother just didn't want to be not in the middle and not the center of attention, kind of a thing, because that was her thing. But I remember sitting in the front seat and listening and my job was to help keep Uncle Frank awake. He had to go to work the next day. And so my job was to keep him awake, talk to him, whatever, and I was in the front seat with Uncle Frank and whoever on my other side, and everybody else was in the back, of course. And we get to a certain point and we're listening to the radio, because that, of course, kept him awake. And I remember him turning on WABC, the what would be our now our 60s music, and playing that because he had to stay awake. So he stayed awake, and we got there, and it was crazy. And the only thing I truly, truly remember once we got there, little Mickey was just a little over a year old, maybe 15 months old. Oh, so cute. And there was newborn little Stephen. I mean, just as cute as a button, laying in his bed. And I was in love with this baby. He had this head of hair. He was just gorgeous. And I mean, he was mine. No matter what, he was my kid. And, so Uncle Frank, of course, went off to go back to work. And, the adults were in the kitchen. She had a very tiny apartment. I don't know where she put us all. I really don't. And I remember watching TV, cartoons, like nonstop. And me and Jeffrey were like, look at all those cartoons. I mean, hour after hour. So we stayed out of the adults' way. We watched cartoons because it was New York, and they had cartoons, kid shows almost all the time. It was like, happy Christmas to us. And it was the strangest. I don't even think I got any presents. It didn't care. But it's one of the Christmases that has stuck with me is the late night Christmas music in Republic. when there were no other sounds around. And I mean nothing but this music and us walking crunch, crunch, crunch through the snow and, listening to the radio. Cleveland didn't have anything like that really back then, or at least I was allowed to listen to. And the nonstop cartoons. I mean, whoa, we hit the big times. And, there were a lot of Christmases that I didn't spend with my mother after that. And, I think that was pretty much the last Christmas I had with her. I had one or two as an adult, and that was it. So it was, sad that she had her depression and whatever she had going on, but I remember that music. So, at least we had a little bit of a nice Christmas, and it wasn't even about the presents.